Somewhere over Indonesia, a plane is cruising at 35,000 feet. 104 people going home. Nobody is worried. Nobody is afraid because nobody knows that someone in that cockpit just reached for a switch that was never supposed to be touched. In the next 7 minutes, 104 people will hit the ground at the speed of sound. And the man who did it made sure there would be almost nothing left to prove it. This is SilkAir Flight MI 185, December 19th, 1997. And this is the black box that someone didn't want you to hear. SilkAir Flight MI 185 was a routine scheduled flight. Jakarta to Singapore, a route flown hundreds of times before. The plane, a Boeing 737-300, registration 9V TRF, was the newest aircraft in SilkAir's entire fleet. Delivered just 10 months earlier on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1997. It had passed a full maintenance check just 10 days before the crash. Every system checked, every component signed off. The pilots called it trouble-free. In command was Captain Su Wei Ming, 41 years old, a former Republic of Singapore Air Force pilot, a trained A4 Skyhawk fighter jet instructor, experienced, decorated, trusted, the kind of man you wanted in that seat. Beside him, First Officer Duncan Ward, a New Zealander, friendly, well liked by everyone who knew him. No history of depression, no problems at work, no reason for anyone to worry. At 3:53 pm, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude, flight level 350, 35,000 feet above the earth. The sky was clear. Everything was normal. Aircraft control in Jakarta cleared them to proceed to Singapore. The crew acknowledged. Two words: routine, professional. Those were the last words anyone ever heard from Flight 185. At exactly 4 pm, Captain Su Wei Ming told his co-pilot he was leaving the cockpit to get water. First Officer Duncan Ward was now alone at the controls. The plane was on autopilot, cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet. Nothing unusual. The passengers had no idea anything had changed. Then, at 4:05 pm and 15.6 seconds, the cockpit voice recorder went dead. Not because of a malfunction, not because of a power cut, not because of anything mechanical, because investigators later confirmed the radio kept transmitting perfectly after the severe stopped. Which means only one thing: someone manually pulled a circuit breaker. Someone in that cockpit chose to silence the recorder. 6 minutes later, at 4:11 pm, the flight data recorder also went dead. Now, both black boxes, the two devices the entire world depends on to understand what happens when planes fall from the sky, were gone, deliberately disabled. The plane was still flying at 35,000 feet. 104 people in their seats, reading magazines, listening to music, watching the clouds pass by, with absolutely no idea that the nightmare had already begun. At 4:12 p.m. and 9 seconds, Jakarta air traffic control radar showed flight MI 185 was still at 35,000 feet. 8 seconds later, the next radar sweep showed the plane was no longer at 35,000 feet. In just 8 seconds, it had entered a full vertical nosedive. Not turbulence, not a mechanical malfunction, not a word strike, a full, steep, controlled nosedive. The kind that only happens when someone commands it. Investigators later calculated the final speed. The Boeing 737 hit the surface of the Musi River at supersonic velocity, faster than the speed of sound. The impact was so violent, so catastrophic, the entire aircraft ceased to exist in an instant. The largest single piece of wreckage ever flew from the riverbed was a fragment of the tail fin. Rescue and recovery teams dove into the Musi River for days. They didn't find bodies. They found fragments, pieces of clothing, parts of sheets, shards of metal the size of your hand. The plane had been traveling so fast on the impact that the fuselage didn't just break apart, it was atomized. Among the 104 people who died that afternoon was Bonnie Hicks, 29 years old, a Singaporean model and published author. She was traveling with her partner, the man she had just gotten engaged to. They had their whole lives ahead of them. They never made it home. None of them did. Two independent investigations were immediately launched. The Indonesian National Transportation Safety Committee, the NTSC, as the lead authority, and the American National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, brought in for technical support. Lead US investigator Greg Feth, one of the most experienced aircraft investigators in the world. His team ran 20 different computer simulations, 20 separate mechanical failure scenarios, rudder malfunction, structural failure, electrical fault, hydraulic failure, every single one. Only one simulation matched the actual radar trajectory of the crash. A high speed, steep dive, commanded deliberately by one of the two pilots. Then came the physical evidence that changed everything. The horizontal stabilizer trim jack screw, a critical flight control component deep inside the tail of the aircraft, was recovered from the riverbed. It had been manually moved from flight level all the way to full nose down. This wasn't a malfunction. Someone had physically commanded that plane into the ground. But who? First Officer Duncan Ward was the first person investigators looked at. He was alone in the cockpit when the CBR was disabled. But they cleared him within weeks. Every colleague, every friend, every family member confirmed the same thing. Duncan Ward was in good spirits that morning. No signs of distress, no financial problems, no motive of any kind. That left one man, Captain Su Wei Ming. In the months before December 19th, 1997, Captain Su Wei Ming's life was quietly, completely unraveling. In the first half of 1997 alone, he had lost $1.2 million in the stock market. His securities trading account had been suspended just 10 days before the crash. for non payment of debts. The exact same week, the plane received its maintenance clearance. The exact same week, he showed up to work, calm, professional, giving nothing away. And it went deeper. He had received multiple formal disciplinary action from SilkAir over his career. One of those disciplinary records was directly related to improperly manipulating the cockpit voice recorder or circuit breaker during a previous flight. He had done it before. He knew exactly where that switch was. He knew exactly what pulling it would do. And then, 1 week before the crash, on December 12th, 1997, he took out a $600,000 life insurance policy set to take effect on the day of the accident. The NTSB's conclusion was precise and devastating. Captain Su Ming waited until his co pilot left the cockpit. He manually pulled the CVR circuit breaker, cutting the voice recorder. He left the cockpit himself and disabled the flight data recorder. He returned to the cockpit, locked the door behind him, and pointed the plane at the earth. Here is where the story gets darker. The Indonesian NTSC published their final official report in December 2000. 3 years of investigation. Their conclusion: no concrete evidence. Cause of accident: undetermined. But here is what they never said publicly. Santoso Sayago, an NTSC investigator who personally worked on SilkAir 185 case, later came forward and revealed something extraordinary. The Indonesian investigators had reached the exact same conclusion as the NTSB, but they were overruled by their superiors. A confidential internal report, later surfaced and reported by the Sydney Morning Herald, confirmed that Indonesian authorities deliberately refused to publish a public verdict on pilot suicide because they were afraid that if the Indonesian public knew a pilot had deliberately crashed a plane full of passengers, nobody would ever want to fly again. So they buried it. 104 families who lost someone that afternoon never received an official explanation, never received the truth. 6 of those families refused to accept it. They sued SilkAir in Singapore's High Court in 2001. They lost. Boeing quietly paid an undisclosed financial settlement. And to this day, more than 27 years later, SilkAir Flight MI 185 remains officially unexplained. Every single day, millions of people board commercial flights. They hand over their boarding pass. They find the receipts. They trust the aircraft. They trust the airlines. They trust the 2 people sitting behind that closed cockpit door. But what SilkAir Flight 185 exposed is a question that aviation authorities have never been able to fully answer. What happens when the threat isn't mechanical? What happens when the danger isn't turbulence, or a faulty engine, or a bad weather? What happens when the danger is the pilot himself? 104 people had no warning, no announcement, no time to react, no chance to call home. In just 36 minutes, they went from boarding a plane at Jakarta's airport to the bottom of the Musi River in Sumatra. And the man believed to have done it knew exactly what he was doing. He silenced both recorders. He made sure investigators would have almost nothing to work with. He made sure the world would never know for certain. The black box is supposed to tell us everything. It is supposed to be the final witness, the one thing that can never lie. SilkAir Flight 185 taught us something that nobody in aviation wants to say loud. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on a plane is the man who knows how to silence it.